In an interview with Evangelization and Culture, the journal of the Word on Fire Institute, Katy Carl noted, quote, "Story puts a body on an idea. It makes the abstract concrete. I've read so many works by people whose minds are full of brilliant thought and who can turn a phrase like nobody's business, and yet who aren't writing literary fiction because they've not yet begun to render a world. We need such essayistic works, too. Thoreau wasn't a novelist. But in the parables, our Lord showed that he also valued the need for narrative, complete narrative." Close quote. Katy Carl on Fragile Objects, her new collection of short stories, and Luminor, the new literary imprint from Word on Fire now. My name is Todd Warner, and this is the Evangelization and Culture Podcast from Word on Fire. Katy Carl is editor of the Word on Fire Luminor imprint, which follows Christ into places he is not easily found through the literary arts. She is editor emeritus of Dappled Things magazine, a project of the Ars Vivendi initiative of the Collegium Institute, and senior affiliate fellow of Penn's program for research on religion and urban civil society. Among other works, she's the author of the novel As Earth Without Water and a collection of short stories, which we'll be exploring today, Fragile Objects. Katy Carl, welcome.
Thank you so much, Todd. It's wonderful to be here. It's such a privilege, such a delight.
Segment 1, The Writer's Craft. Beatrix Potter once observed, quote, "There's something delicious about writing the first words of a story. You never quite know where they'll take you," close quote. While Albert Camus insisted, quote, "The purpose of a writer is to keep civilization from destroying itself," close quote. Either way, novelist Isabel Allende adds, quote, "Writing is a calling, not a choice," close quote. So Katy, let's begin with a question, the vast question that I always want to ask all talented writers. Why do you write?
I can't think of a better answer right now than the one Flannery O'Connor gave when she was asked this question. And she just said in her inimitable sort of terse style, "Because I'm good at it." And that's justification enough. She also famously said, no one has any business writing literary fiction for an audience unless he's called to do so by the presence of some gift. And I think this idea of gift that is really at the heart of what I do as a writer and in other areas of my life. But if I didn't feel that God had given me something that I was responsible for cultivating and responsible to in terms of trying to make the best I could out of it, then certainly it's not an easy thing. It's not a thing that our culture especially values the way that it once did. There's a lot of just struggle, and there's a lot of logistical problems, and certainly with having a family at home, a young family at home, that's certainly a tension that has to be navigated too. So I do it because I can't not do it.
I love that.
If I were not to do it, I would not be being fully who God created me to be.
Katy, on that notion, because and stepping into your instructing as a professor, teaching young writers how to write and so on, what's your sense about aptitude that you see or don't see in your students? If someone doesn't have the aptitude or they don't have that sense of calling, is it impossible for them to ultimately be? I mean, can you learn your way into being a good writer? Can you gut your way into a sense of calling? And it's strange to ask that question, but do you see people that you're like, you know what, I really don't think this is for you? What's your sense about that kind of ineffable aspect of what it takes? You just described. You got to have the skills and the gifts, and you got to have the sense of calling. If those are lacking, can you acquire that, or is it like, no, you probably should find your vocation elsewhere?
I don't want people to think of talent as a kind of on-off switch. It's like a 1-0 binary. Talent is a spectrum. And I think someone who has maybe a modest talent, but an absolute willingness to give it their all, or at least as much as their vocation and sense of current life allows them to give. If they're putting in the work, then they're much more likely to do well than somebody who's wildly talented who doesn't work. There's more to this than just did God give you the gifts necessary in the first place. Of course, that's part of it. But if you have some gifts and a good work ethic, you're doing more for yourself and for others typically than someone who has amazing gifts and doesn't care to do something with them, or doesn't find the motivation, or doesn't find the consistency. There's a wide range of cases. I don't want to prescribe for all as if I were prescribing for one. But it's a good question. It's worth thinking about, right? Because many more people are going to be interested in the literary arts and have some draw or some pull to this way of doing things, this way of engaging with the world, then are going to complete full-length works, that are publishable. But we also have a really crying need for good literary criticism. We have a really great need for good readers. The whole enterprise doesn't work if there aren't people who are just informed, educated readers, and whose participation looks more like acquiring the books and talking to their friends about the books, talking to the books, I guess, in a certain sense, because when you read, it is a conversation between yourself and the author. You are receiving something. And if a writer doesn't have somebody who's capable of receiving what they're trying to do, then in a sense, they're doing it in a vacuum and it's senseless. And I think this kind of thing is the root of a lot of people's perception that, the literary arts are maybe this thing that's only for a certain number, it's only for kind of a small group of people. It's not really for everybody. No, there's something out there for everybody. There's a reader for for almost every text that's any good. But the question is, who has eyes to see, and your training and your study is as much a part of that as anything innate.
Sure, very good. Katy, when did you start writing?
When did I begin? Gosh, I have often said I have been writing since I was big enough to hold a pencil, which is probably true. But seriously, I didn't begin to write seriously until the end of high school, beginning of college. I began to read with more seriousness kind of in the middle of high school, kind of began to develop something approaching a literary taste. I mean, before that, I had just read anything that was handy, whether it was remotely age appropriate or not. From newspapers to Time magazine to, the little things you find around in the dentist office, like just anything I could get my hands on. Right? So yeah, there's sort of a transformation that took place. And I want to say it was first Shakespeare and then the tradition of the American novel.
Was there
that changed my mind?
Was there some pivotal person in your life? Was there a professor of English literature in college, a teacher in high school, a family member that read to you when you were little and got your imagination wild about narrative and so on? All the above. Where were any of the catalyzing people in your life that led you to a life of writing?
My parents always encouraged me. My dad in particular would read to me at bedtime. When I was about 9, we read The Hobbit together, and then he started reading me The Lord of the Rings, and then that wasn't going quickly enough for me, so I just kind of took it out of his hands and started reading it myself. Tolkien was the first writer whose sentence structure I had the good sense to envy, but you have to kind of have studied the way he studied in order to understand why he wrote the way that he wrote. So a good piece of advice I hear sometimes is, don't read the just the writers you admire, read the writers they wrote. So I kind of acquired an appetite for books that were maybe out of my range at that age, but I was also also reading a lot of other contemporary fantasy at the time, which was, mixed results, I guess. I have, and then I had sort of a conversion to Shakespeare early in high school for a lot of reasons. My mom handed me Midsummer Night's Dream and said, hey, you like fantastical things. Why don't you try this? And I fell in love with the music of his language and just really never looked back. I had sort of the idea that I might even go into acting and study Shakespearean drama. But it quickly kind of was born in on me that what I really loved in all of this was the language, and that you could not only find that in other kinds of literature, realist literature in particular, but you could find a way to say something about what it is to be alive in the world now through contemporary realism that you couldn't really find in any other literary space, and that drew me and still does.
Was there ever, in the midst of your reading and then the writing that came out of it, was there ever an interest in the nonfiction side of things, as opposed to novels and short stories, the fictional narrative? Where did nonfiction reading and or writing fit into the framework of your personal choice of what you would write?
So in college, I thought I might study journalism. In fact, I took a certificate in creative and professional writing at St. Louis University, but kind of quickly discovered too that life, the life you have to live as a journalist, is very fast paced and stressful. And I'm an introvert and kind of a curl up in a room with a book kind of person, but very drawn to the tradition of literary journalism in the 20th century. There's a whole array of writers, including writers who also were novelists, such as Orwell and Hemingway, who wrote incredible nonfiction reportage with the same kind of lovely structure in the sentences and the same kind of thoughtfulness about the entire arc of the story, but facing real things that were happening in the world at the time. So there's something very attractive about that too, right? There's something necessary about that. So I think nonfiction and fiction, the relationship of these disciplines, right? I think one of the reasons for the decline in fiction reading in our time is partly because the realism got to such a point that people thought, well, if I'm completely responsible to the actual event, if everybody's going to be wanting to run commentary on the difference between my version and the actual version, and if that's the only real interest that anyone has in the story, right, is in digging through to find what the real version is, right, then why not fly, into fantasy and into a kind of it's not necessarily the case that it's always wrong to escape. As Tolkien said, if things are terribly wrong, you should want to escape from them. But there's sort of, I see it as a split or as a moment of divergence where there are writers who are very interested in exploring the feeling of real life, and there are writers who want to use fiction for sort of creating an alternative space in which we can imagine how things might be if they were only how we wish they were. And it's not that there aren't good uses of both impulses. I think there are. I just find myself drawn in one direction rather than the other, in the direction of realism. A minute ago, can I backtrack?
Yeah.
Because you asked about people, and I didn't mention, and I should mention, my junior AP English teacher in particular, Nancy Fontenot, who taught us American Lit, and she titled her class Suffering into Wisdom. And looking back on that, it was absolutely an introduction into reading seriously and thoughtfully through a Catholic in both the big and small C senses, Catholic lens. At the time, though, I was not necessarily thinking of it that way, but absolutely, it had that kind of transformative effect on my ability to read.
Wonderful. So Katy, Father Damien Ference once wrote that, quote, Flannery O'Connor had no intention of writing Catholic novels or Catholic stories. Rather, she wanted to write good novels and good stories, and she trusted that if she was a good Catholic, her worldview would manifest itself in her work. O'Connor professed, according to Father Ference, quote, I see from the standpoint of Christian orthodoxy, this means that for me, the meaning of life is centered in our redemption by Christ, and what I see in the world, I see in relation to that, close quote. So, Katy, how does faith inform and figure into your writing?
It will be completely obvious by now that O'Connor is a tremendously formative influence on my own way of thinking about my writing. I discovered that exact essay that you just quoted as my sophomore year in college, and it did change everything that I thought about writing as a Catholic, because I had been up to that point really searching for examples of, the faith sort of represented realistically in fiction. As we both know, that's not what O'Connor does. She doesn't really represent Catholics very often. There's maybe one story, Temple of the Holy Ghost, where you get a direct, realistic representation of Catholics from her. Most of the time, what she's doing is looking for evidence of the imperfect communion in the lives of other Christians and of secular people in the rural and urban South of her time. So she's a realist in that sense, and that's precisely what I've been talking about, is this sense that you see what you see, and you don't have to try to see it differently because you think that you have to put on your Christ-colored glasses in order to change what's there. He's already everywhere and in everything, and the question is, to what extent are we receptive? To what extent are we capable of seeing? To what extent are we cooperating with him? And there's a world of things to explore there. So, I don't think it's the case that that writers have to try to sort of force Christ into their writing. It's rather a question of vision and discernment, and trying to clear away illusion until you can see what's really there. And that's what O'Connor did in her work. And in my own very different way, that's what I'm trying to do also in mine.
It's interesting. I had a conversation with Bishop Barron not too long ago on the nature of beauty and the notion of its objectivity and so on. And the way he kind of described it against the notion of, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, is the notion that the person sitting or standing at the underneath the Sistine Chapel and looking at this, what is objectively beautiful, and only a diehard contrarian who's being intellectually dishonest is going to say that's not beautiful. But part of what he said is there needs to be a mode within us that arrives at a sense of understanding the objective beauty of what's before us. It is not the lacking of beauty in the Sistine Chapel. It's the lacking of the sense of beauty within us. And to some extent, I'm hearing you say a little bit of this, that a certain amount of appropriate or proper formation of each one of us to see the true, the good, and the beautiful. In some ways it's on our shoulders to be able to discern those things in as rough of a story as A Good Man Is Hard to Find, written by Flannery O'Connor. It's not necessarily Flannery O'Connor's job to thwack us over the head with the emanations of grace and so on and so forth. So does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, that resonates. I think that's really well said. And I think it ties into to the concept of seeds of the word, right? Semina Verbi.
Yes.
This first is something that Bishop Barron had picked up on in one of the church fathers. I think Irenaeus. Somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure. But the idea that these sort of clues or threads that lead back to the truth of Christ, or the truth of the Trinity, they're rooted in and sprinkled throughout creation, and it's not that they're in the same concentration everywhere. And when I say that they're everywhere, I'm not meaning that in some kind of pantheist or panentheist sense. I'm meaning that it is simply the case that everything God created is, in some sense, an emanation of His being, and to some degree, there's a clue to His goodness that's to be found in that. And so much of the drama of the human soul is: are we seeing that, or are we acting in accordance with the reality of that? Or are we, as most often is the case, we're not, and we get ourselves into all kinds of hot water, and then there's drama in getting us back out, or getting us to see that we're in it, rather than being frogs that are being slowly boiled.
So again, to quote Flannery O'Connor, what people are going to need to know as we were talking here, Katy and I are both huge fans of Flannery O'Connor, so she's going to find her way into this conversation over and over again. But to quote Flannery O'Connor, Flannery once lamented, quote, "Writing a novel is a terrible experience during which the hair often falls out and the teeth decay. I'm always irritated by people who imply that writing fiction is an escape from reality. It is a plunge into reality, and it's very shocking to the system," close quote. So Katy, going to process, first of all, what's your habit of writing? Let's start with that. And then the next question I'll follow up with is, to those who encounter struggles in their writing efforts, what can you say about your dark days in the crafting of your work? So let's start with your habit. What is Katy Carl waking up early, hot cup of coffee, going down to the basement, there's that corner desk, and then you're just kind of grinding it out for 2 hours, or is it moments of inspiration with 30 minutes of writing and then stepping away? How does the writing life of Katy Carl look?
So I'm trying, as I said in our interview before, to become one of these early morning writers. It's going with spotty success. In the school year, it works fine. Now in the summer, it has become sort of an impossibility, and I'm lapsing back into that writer that I used to be, who is the 11 p.m. to 1 a.m., the late shift.
Yes.
Yeah, and not that I'm being perfectly consistent with that either these days, but when I do, I'm trying to, I just sit. There's a front room in our house that we kind of transformed into a study for me, and that's where I am most of the time. I'm trying to be more linear rather than jump all over the place, but I'm also coming up against the fact that there's a certain degree to which process is linked to what it is you have to say, and what it is I have to say is kind of global, and jumping and trying to connect points that seem very far apart and seem like they shouldn't be connectable, and so that is requiring a certain amount of gymnastics from me on the page. Right. So process, it can be messy. It can look like it's not going to become anything, and like it's not very focused. But as Hemingway said, things happen gradually and then suddenly. And it's definitely still in the gradually stage of drafting the novel that I'm working on right now. But I know that before too long, hopefully within the next 18 months or so, I would like to be hitting the suddenly stage of things and seeing it all come together. Darker days, let me think about this, because there have been different times in which I've gone through kinds of dark passages with the writing life, and different reasons for that darkness. So, one of the the things that I get asked about a lot, and I tend not to want to talk about too much because everybody's experience is so different, is just writing with very young children. I actually had the contrary experience to what I think most people do, which is that I found I wrote more and I read more when my children were very, very young, because, in a certain sense, babies stay where you put them.
Yeah. There is that.
Or, worst case scenario, you can strap the baby to yourself in a sling and get done what you need to get done. So that was my experience of that. Again, I don't want to seem to sound prescriptive here, but my my experience of that was that it was very confluent between the creativity that's inherent to early motherhood and the creativity that that goes on the page. Of course, nothing was getting finished then because it was not possible to focus very well for extended periods of time. I'm going through a kind of similar season now. Not that my children are, are small anymore, but they do, in a sense, stay where I put them when they go to school. So, outside of but most of that time now is my work for Word on Fire, and so with Luminor, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So, as we've said, it's a question of finding the time. And I think some of the discouragements that come in are not just about finding the time, which is the thing that I think people ask me most about, but about wondering, who is this for? Who is this really reaching? Who is this really helping? Who is this, or is this just something that I'm doing for my own sense of, who I would like to be in a sort of selfish way, right? Because when you start talking, as I did at the beginning, about being who God called you to be, right, there's a sense in which our time is very invested in kind of, creating your own identity and hacking yourself like a statue out of stone, as if that were the way that the self happens, when really the self is first given. So I think there was a need to kind of dig deeper and look at what connection what I was doing had to to the larger church and to the world. But again, not in a sort of predetermined or overdetermined way. And that was, I think, the key to finishing my first novel, was finding that connection. Then and again, to give credit to important people, I have to it's a delight and a joy to say that Joshua Wren really rescued that novel. It would not be what it is, without his guidance, his commentary, his editorial keenness, and his friendship. So very deeply grateful for all of that. He really brought me out of one of my sort of darker passages with that work. I guess the other thing really is just looking at the larger picture of the technological landscape and the entertainment, I guess, landscape. I'm sure you've seen that graphic where the small fish of art is being eaten by the larger fish of entertainment, is being eaten by the larger fish of the internet, is being eaten by the larger fish of the larger economic landscape. I don't know that I'm getting the details of that right, but that's a Ted Gioia original, right? But it just this sense that whatever it is you're doing, it feels like it's being swallowed up in things that are less finely grained and more just designed to appeal to the baser senses and needs of humanity. That's, I think, an inherent frustration for anyone who wants to do anything that's kind of finely crafted or in any way intellectually serious in our time. You're up against kind of a battlefield, right? You're definitely not in a position to say that you can't exactly say that the odds are stacked in your favor, right? There's just a sort of flood, right, of content, right? And content is, I think we should hear that in a sort of similar tone to like almost the word vomit, right? There's like AI slop is a real concern, right? The sort of lack of any kind of sense that what we look at in our spare time needs to be anything that's in a sense good for us, right? Like people sort of see that as kind of snobbery or how do I want to put this? If people see that as you're kind of prescriptive, like who are you to tell me what I should be watching, what I should be listening to, what I should be reading? Tell me what one of these things is good, better than another. so that's discouraging, right? That is
Yeah.
a kind of source of darkness for serious writers. But I think of something that a novelist I know who's has his degree from Iowa, and he's just brilliant. And he says, that we should think about this more like we think about advice on how to feed yourself well, right? We absolutely can tell people that, fruit juice is better than Coke, and what's really better than either of them for you is water. So there's just an objective nature that you have, and there are things that it needs, and you are going to be healthier and happier if you give your nature the things that it really needs, and if you stay away from the things that are extraneous or are actively going to harm you or make you less well. So if we don't feel like that's a nannying thing to say, then we can absolutely make the analogy to the things that we put into our eyes and our minds and our hearts.
Katy, do you think that writing is a calling or a choice? What's your sense about that?
I think both. I think you have to choose your calling. Just because you hear it doesn't mean you'll necessarily follow it. And even if you follow it, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be easy, or that it's going to feel good all the time or be exactly what you imagined. In fact, our imaginations of these things at an early stage, it can give us a lot of energy, but they can also become a problem in that they, when you get into the messy middle of it and it doesn't feel like you thought it would, you can think that it's time to quit. And it's not necessarily time to quit. You don't know what kind of story you're in until it ends. So if the story hasn't ended, then you still have a choice about what to do from here.
Well said. Segment 2, Fragile Objects. Katy Carl begins her book, Fragile Objects, with an epigraph from Virginia Woolf saying, quote, "You know how the body seems to shake itself free from an argument and to apologize for a mood of exaltation, flinging itself down and expressing in the looseness of its attitude a readiness to take up with something new, whatever it may be that comes next to hand," close quote. Now, it does not go unnoticed that Woolf's quote is from her book titled Solid Objects. So, Katy, to begin with, tell us why you chose to name your short story collection Fragile Objects, which is also the title of the first story, and the significance of juxtaposing the title against Virginia Woolf's quote from Solid Objects.
Yeah, so this is complicated and has a lot of steps. So let me see if I can bring it home without going too far afield. I wrote the title story, Fragile Objects, during COVID at a time when we were all thinking quite a lot about sort of the fragility of the human frame and health and our own plans and relationships and thoughts, in comparison to what actually happens in the world, right? And it seemed to me as I read it over and was revising it, then in a lot of ways it was paradigmatic of what concerns me both in art and in life, which is precisely just this way in which we make plans for ourselves, but the reality is very often different. We kind of gather things about ourselves that we've made or that others have made, and we have a real tendency to make idols of the things that we create, that we build, and we don't realize how human and how limited and how contingent and how fragile everything is around us. The concept of anti-fragility also gained real popularity in this time, and for this exact reason, right? The concept of resilience was being talked about a lot. But I wanted to look at what happens specifically in the concrete for individuals for whom, for whatever reason, resilience is not immediately an option, or anti-fragility is not immediately an option. That there is a limit to what our choice can do. We can't choose our way out of every problem or out of every vulnerability. As Christopher Bay has said in interviews, there are kinds of suffering from which no amount of privilege will shield you. And those are situations that I often find my characters in. They have been sheltered, possibly over-sheltered up to a point that they are finding themselves with limited choices, and yet none of the choices that are before them seem to be anything that will get them out of the situations they're in. The only way out of the situations is through them. And so I was looking in particular at the sort of the triad of characters in that story, the dad, the grandmother, and the little boy, and they're each representing a generation, and they're each representing a certain approach. And none of this was clear to me as I was writing, but it all came clear later. And each of them in their own ways is vulnerable to perceptions and demands being made on them, and just to nature itself, just to their reality of what it is to be a human being and a body in the world. And so and the objects on the shelves all around in the grandmother's house are this kind of visualization, or this kind of externalization of they're kind of like William's glass menagerie, right?
Yeah.
They're like the externalizations of these emotions that are so extraneous to the situation, and yet you can't say that they don't exist, right? You can't say that they're not real, or that they don't have any kind of relationship to what's going on. So when the kind of cataclysmic ending of that story gets going, it is for me a kind of exploration of, well, what do you do when there is nothing to do, right? What do you do when the only thing to do is accept what's going on? Because as humans, we're not necessarily terribly great at accepting that which we can't do otherwise than accept. We'll fight it. We'll fight it even when it's not in our best interest to do so. So and again, I didn't start out to illustrate that. I had no idea where I was going with that. I just had this image of a little boy getting into a car with his dad after school, and they're driving through my hometown. They're driving down the road in the early springtime with the Mardi Gras beads still in the trees. And that was all. That was it.
Wow. It's interesting because I think about, so in my practice of medicine, I can look at a person's chart before I go into the room. And then I go into the room and the entire experience changes, because people they have free will. They have independence of thought, independence of action, and there's contingency, there's chance, and so on. And so the entire engagement, now it doesn't mean there isn't a framework. Someone comes in with a complaint, they generally are going to be somewhat faithful to that complaint, but even sometimes that's wrong. The front desk heard it wrong, or they recorded something that isn't their real reason for being there. My whole point is, one of the things I've learned in all the years of practicing medicine is sort of what you're unfolding in this collection of short stories, is that it's complicated. People are complicated. And there isn't a algorithmic way to approach life. There's not an algorithmic way that's unfailingly helps you in approaching other people. It's a mix of wonder and vexation, all kind of wrapped up in one. So your stories are they're gripping, but in particular to me, they're gripping because they wrestle with the complexity of what it means to be human and to be interacting with other complex human beings. So in reading Fragile Objects, my mind kept returning to the opening lines of Tolstoy's Anna Karenina: happy families are all alike, each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Your stories, as I said, are replete with the messiness of the human condition, and especially the messiness of family dynamics. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily always bad messiness. It just means it's complicated. But there's in these stories, there's emotionally abusive mothers, estranged daughters, wayward sons. The list goes on. So, not trying to get too personal, but you really get into the heart of these characters. I mean, this is like the way it is. And so my question is, where do you draw from such lifelike representations? And I'm not trying to ask you to confess this is what but I mean, you cover so many different characters, different generations, different scenarios, and yet it's almost like you've been there. So my question is, where do you draw that from, or is it just the creative gift that you have?
So I'm going to take this question sideways a little bit because the real answer is I don't know. So I'm going to try to make that sound smarter.
There we go. We can just move on to the next question. No, I'm teasing. Please. I want to hear the sideways answer.
But I think a part of where I'm coming from here is that I heard this lovely quote, and I can't remember the source. Maybe somebody can help me out here. The difference between life and art is only an inch wide, but all the art is in that inch. For me, I'm very opposed to the contemporary rise of autofiction, which I think is just cheater's memoir, right? You aren't really writing fiction if what you're doing is just pulling experiences from your own life and giving a gloss to them that's, maybe 1 or 2% different from what the actual story was, but really the character's you, and really the people are the people in your life.
Yeah.
For me, it's not art, it's not fiction until I've translated it from whatever the original was, to the point that it's unrecognizable.
Yeah.
It has to truly be somebody else and somebody else's experience. And yet the emotional core or the kernel there has to be similar enough that I can recognize it even if nobody else would. I don't feel personally a particular call to write memoir, and I certainly don't want to run that down as an art. I think that's difficult and risky and necessary. And if certain people weren't doing it and doing it well, then we wouldn't have a certain amount of richness in our culture. And I don't necessarily want to run down all efforts at autofiction either, because I think there are some that are more artfully done than others. But I think overall, our time's obsession with, again, the individual and this sort of supposed act of self-creation gets us in a lot of trouble and gets us tangled up in ways that if we could take a step back from our individual situations and our egos, we could take a step out of that little circle that's so self-enclosed. That's what I think of as the self, and see from other perspectives. We would maybe have more peace in our personal lives, maybe have even more peace in our national and international world. Yeah.
Yeah, well said. Katy, do your characters surprise you? In other words, do they begin to write themselves and you become a member of the audience even as your pen gives them life?
So this is a sort of inherent tension, and you'll hear different fiction writers give different answers to this. For me, I'm not a Nabokovian here. My characters aren't my puppets, but neither are they fully, extraneous, self-existing individuals, right? There is a sense in which I'm in control, but there's also a sense in which I'm in control of something that's inherently a surprising process. So I think being open to process is part of what makes characters, what allows characters to surprise you, right? Holding, certain uncertainties, right? Practicing what, the poets through Keats would call negative capability, right? Is what allows you to have characters who are going to do things that you don't seem to have told them to do.
Yeah.
You don't seem to have made these things up, even though in a certain sense you are making them up, and something in your mind is the origin of whatever it is that they're doing. You're still not. And not sort of like holding the puppet strings the way that Nabokov would say that writers do. I don't have that sense of holding the puppet strings when I write. I'm trying to be open.
Yeah. Let's talk about a couple of these stories. So the short story Company Men, we find ourselves peering into the administrative and interpersonal relations between fellow priests and their vicar overseer. Could you just tell us a little bit about this story, who the characters are, and what sort of is unfolding in this story?
Sure. So I need to, make sure to say up front that this is entirely invented and sort of, drawn out of, reading of news and reading of reports and reading of books and other kinds of things, rather than from any personal experience. But the basic situation is that we have an aging bishop who's probably near retirement, but in, obviously ill health, and a chancellor or vicar of some kind. I don't remember if we get his exact title in the story, but he's a close associate of the bishop and helps him with all kinds of his various day to day, including the administration of the diocese, and maybe is more more involved in that because of the bishop's state of health than in most cases would be realistic. They find out that there are reports against or suspicions about a particular young priest in their diocese, and the chancellor or vicar character goes to visit an old friend who's the pastor in the parish where this young priest also resides. And the chancellor or vicar character, Hernandez, is trying to convince the parish priest, the pastor Donner, to is sort of nudge the young priest out, encourage him to go take a retreat, to take a leave of absence, to kind of get him out of the parish in a way that there won't be a direct line from this event back to the bishop. It'll seem as if this was voluntary or requested, or something that the bishop just simply checked off on rather than something that he deeply looked into. Right. And it's exploring, in a certain sense, the nature of power. It's exploring, the ways in which the official way that things happen and the actual way that things happen can be divergent, and exploring the way in which very often, and I don't mean to point the finger by any means at the priesthood or the episcopacy in this sense, but just as any human being, we can look away from things that we would rather not see. And I think it's an attempt to make sense of some of the material on the abuse crisis that I studied when I was writing As Earth Without Water, in which, as you know, a particular character is abused by a sort of wandering priest who's not a member of the community that he resides in, right? Who's just a visitor. So in that novel, I mostly was able to stay away from all the problems of, yes, but how did this, how was this allowed, and how, how did this continue to go on without anybody noticing? Because the scenario makes that, it makes that easy to answer. But in most cases, that's not easy to answer at all. So this was trying to unfold and unpack some of that, and get a little bit closer to the sort of typical case without making it a sort of making it seem as if I think this is always what happens, right? Everything is very individual, right? Everything breaks down to individual cases and individual people, right? And motivations are wildly different, and the things that happen are wildly different. And I think that's part of the wisdom of canon law, is that we take things, we take cases one by one. I think that can be part of what causes things to go more frustratingly slowly, right? But unfortunately, that seemed to have also been a factor in the perpetuation sometimes in the past, right? Where there was sort of an individual mercy or an individual understanding extended to individuals, and maybe they deserved some mercy and understanding, but at the same time they needed to be removed from situations much more urgently. And there's a tragic ending to this story because that need is not seen in this story. So.
Again, your exploration of the human condition here, notwithstanding that these are priests and we have these higher standards appropriately for them as in their work, but there's still the sense that even in these situations, there can be the trap of self-deception, the trap of rationalization, the blind spots, the convenient decisions, the sometimes merciless decisions, in the subtlest of ways and also in the most overt of ways, and so on. And so I think again, as this unfolds towards greater tragedy, as you talk about, it is a good exposition of how human beings can wrongfully think about things because it's part of our human condition to, I mean, not that that can't be corrected and redeemed and so on, and ought to be acted upon differently, but it is a very sobering and accurate representation about the slide that can happen when we allow it to happen. So I thought it was a very good story. It was a riveting story. I want to ask you, Katy, the shortest story in the book is Solo, and it is only 2 pages long, and yet as a parent of 2 daughters who in their younger years danced, I understood every word. So I mean, could you unpack this one for us a little bit?
Sure. This flash fiction won actually an honorable mention in a secular flash fiction contest online.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I've never heard flash fiction. It's called flash. Is that like just like an abbreviated, like it's 2 pages and here you have it? Or
yeah,
what does that mean?
People call it microfiction or flash fiction, or they have different names for it. But it is a form that kind of evolved with internet culture where you are doing what a short story does, but you're trying to do it in an extremely compressed way, right? It's typically 1,000 words or less is the cutoff to be considered flash fiction. So I think this one is sitting right about 1,000 words. And it is trying to tell a story of a mother who is trying to support her twin daughters' talent as ballerinas, but the sort of backstage aspect of this, the sacrifices that nobody sees for this to be possible, at the invisible work that goes on when anybody's talent is being supported. And in a way, it's a way for me to think through, I've been on the receiving end of this so often. What does it look like to be on the giving end? And it does shout out that line from Tolstoy that you quoted earlier at the beginning of Anna Karenina, happy families, unhappy families, right? Who can tell from a distance, I think is how we open. And it is in some ways within the mother's voice and perspective the entire time, trying to figure out whether what she's doing for her daughters really constitutes her happiness or their own. Even though, in some sense, glorious what they can do, is it really, how is their calling and hers and the world's need all coming together in this scenario? What's being left out of that equation? It's another meditation on vocation. Am I ever really doing anything else? I don't know.
No, but it's a limitless thing to plumb. So I think that's great.
So, it was kind of something that came to me. I don't want to say exactly in a dream, but I did have sort of the initial mood of it delivered, and I kind of woke up and started scribbling. And initially, the plan was for a much longer piece, and then as I edited, I kept finding that the kernel of it, the core of it, was really better served by a shorter form. And so I just kept cutting and polishing until I had this kind of gym-like little thing. I'm really proud of it, actually.
Boy, for you to have captured in 2 pages what so many, I have an 18-year-old recently graduated daughter and an almost 16-year-old now. Boy, I was sitting right there in the dance room looking at my phone, but also looking because they're finishing up this routine or what have you. When I think about basketball, when I think about, band, I mean, you think about the profound amounts of devotion we all as parents are trying to give to our children and their endeavors. And yet there is the questions that get raised about, are we going, where does this path go? Is this leading to a greater fulfillment? I'm tired, they're tired, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, in 2 pages, you captured the glory and the work and sometimes the uncertainties of a parent's deep investment in their child and their child's endeavors. So I'm like, man, that's really, it's well done.
Thanks.
Yeah. So let's go to Allie and Jack. So these are 2 separate stories, but they're basically bookends of the kind of, different lens of the similar situation, if I'm not mistaken. Let's speak so these are 2 stories, independent and yet the same characters, and it's being told from each of their perspectives. Tell us about how the story of Allie and the story of Jack and their kind of wedding together. How did that, the wedding of the stories, not their being married. How did that come about?
Yes. So preface this by saying these are the two stories, these bookends or pair that I kind of get the most mail about. People tend to respond fairly strongly to them. Again, these were COVID era stories. These were both published online during COVID. These are, and I think these kind of encapsulate a kind of gender divide that was going on and becoming sharper and worse because of the internet and because of so many other factors during that time. It follows this couple, and they are. Forgive me. They are living in a a pre-COVID world with in-person jobs and in-person gigs as still a possibility. So 2018, 2019, but they're living in a New South suburb. They are exactly the kind of character that Walker Percy told us we needed to be writing more about. These people who were inhabiting or who the inheritors of this transformation of the region that went on from the civil rights era to the technological revolution. Walker Percy's mostly writing about life pre-internet still, but these are definitely post-internet folks. They're together, they're living together. They never get married. They kind of have like a pseudo shower when they move into their house, and friends bring them all these gifts. That's all implied before the beginning of the story, and the way that it opens. And the way that I met them, so to speak, is, Jack has left that, he's taken off to do whatever it is he wants to do. It's not entirely clear. And Allie is stuck there with, a kind of struggling with her job at a nonprofit where she actually does all the work, and her fancy, privileged, wealthy superior takes all the credit for what she does. And, she is not earning much, but it's enough to keep two people afloat. And then she finds out that she's pregnant, and Jack is gone. So, her story is mainly the arc of her deciding what to do about this and coming to a certain conclusion, and then finding that even her having come to that conclusion is maybe not enough to get her where she thought she wanted to be. And then Jack follows his own trajectory. He's trying to become a musician in Nashville, but again, he's one of these folks with loads of talent and not much of a desire to work. I sent an early draft to Arthur Powers. He's a wonderful short story writer and a fellow Wise Blood author, and he told me that Jack was a wastrel, right, in the fine tradition of wastrel stories going all the way back to Tom Jones. Right?
Yes.
Jack is he's kind of this wandering creature without stability who it kind of blames the culture for all of his problems, which typically are actually of his own making and choice. So he's also slightly has the makeup of character. He's struggling with addiction issues that he can't really name or own as such. And he kind of sees these as normal or normative social behaviors in the in the circles that he's running in. Seems like this is what everybody does, and so the inability to name it kind of makes it impossible to kind of face it or deal with it. And it also is standing in between him and the life he really wants. He's stuck living the life he thought he wanted, but again, his choices, like Allie's, are not enough to get him where he really wants to be. So,
yeah, it's he's infuriating. I just had such a visceral reaction against this guy and his absolute utter. I mean, his notion that he was always going to start something new and remake himself, and then something always got in the way, and it wasn't his fault. He had no discipline, and it was just the absolute black hole of narcissism, and it's juxtaposed against this story of Allie, and you're like, oh my gosh. I mean, it's like I said, I was viscerally just almost sickened by the kind of person this guy was. So I don't know if that was your intent, but boy, and again, it's this is the strength of your writing is you make characters complicated and yet sympathetic in with the situation with Allie, and just revolted in the situation with what's his name again? Jack. Yeah. So anyway, so well done. Well done.
Thank you. I almost have to tell you. Okay, so now I have a confession to make, which I don't want you to feel bad about it. I think absolutely we should have this reaction to Jack. This is kind of almost necessary, but I feel like part of how I wrote him came out of needing to see and name a certain tendency in myself, right? A tendency to kind of blame the culture, right? No, seriously, like a tendency to blame the culture for things that I was struggling with. And suddenly when I gender flipped that, it was possible for me to see it. And I don't know why that worked the way that it did, but it did. But it's just the tendency to say, like I could do this and I could do that if it weren't for such and such a thing, right? If it weren't for this expectation and that expectation, right? No, like flip it and then you can see it.
I will say this: I don't find you revolting at all. Number one, and number two is you do not impress upon me. I know in your heart of hearts this is a struggle for you. You do not impress upon me or anybody around you that that's the way you are. But also there is probably, and this is not me trying to make up lost ground, but I will say there probably is also that reckon sometimes obviously the whole thing of we hate, I don't want to say we hate, but we hate that which we see in ourselves sometimes. So again, the excuse making, I mean, I can be an excuse maker too. I mean, and so there's probably an element of that, but it's one of those things where you look and you say the impotence with which you are acting, as opposed to the powers with which you have to do the right thing for her, for yourself in so many ways, and you're just living like I love the word wastrel. It's a harsh word. And it kind of doesn't recognize the dignity, your dignified role as a child of God. But it is something that it's maddening. And to be honest with you, that's maddening when I get into those moments. It's maddening in myself too. Yeah. So wow. So I mean, if you look deeply into yourself and you flipped the gender script, man, you banged it out.
Thanks. No, and I mean, it should be maddening too in another way, right? Because precisely, his being there for her could not have saved her from what she had to go through. But did she have to go through it alone?
Exactly.
She have to go through it without any support? Not really, right? He, if he'd been willing to use his energy another way, he could have done something, if not everything, right?
And the landlord, her name is escaping me, but the person who kind of. Yeah, Violet, who then, kind of says unconventionally, she steps away from this job with this terrible boss, and she employs her effectively to do things around the house. And then she becomes sort of, a de facto mother figure for her, and kind of looking out for her to the point that there's an affection even for Allie to say, when I'm going up the stairs and I don't know where she is, I'm worried. Could there have been something that would happen? And what then? And that's a person who ostensibly should have no investment other than collecting your rent once a month, but instead there's been this bond. So she found somebody, and we all reading this are saying, okay, at least we can breathe a little bit, because Allie is not navigating this utterly alone.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, there's a sort of sense in which providence is operative there for her and for both of them, really, right? Because they are kind of coming together to kind of hedge each other against a society that's kind of discarded both of them.
Hi, I'm Todd Warner, Managing Editor of Evangelization Culture, the journal of the Word on Fire Institute. Word on Fire is a global evangelical community that exists to provide our members with the resources they need to proclaim Christ to a secular culture. Our award-winning quarterly journal, Evangelization Culture, is offered exclusively to Word on Fire Institute members. It's a tangible representation of our mission and goal to lead with beauty in order to bring others to the knowledge of truth. Inside each issue, you'll find writing from premier scholars and inspiring pieces on literature, culture, and daily life from fellow missionaries on the journey to know and serve Christ. Get a copy of the current issue of the Evangelization Culture Journal for free by visiting wordonfire.org/journal. Thank you, and join us in bringing Christ to a hungry culture. Segment 3, Luminor and the Catholic Literary Renaissance. Asked in a recent interview that we discussed earlier with Evangelization Culture, the Journal of the Word on Fire Institute, Katy Carl answered the question about why Word on Fire was launching Luminor, a new literary publishing imprint. And she said this, quote, "In a culture so polarized, divided, and fragmented as the techno-feudalist, symbolic capitalist English-speaking world, it can be hard to know where to look for literature that is life-giving instead of exhausted, demoralizing, and despair-ridden. It isn't as if that literature is not being produced, but only that it isn't being quickly enough discovered and brought to its natural audiences. The test of time sifts things, to be sure, but if market and technological forces are allowed to have their way unopposed, then we will see not discovery or preservation, but breakdown. Books will become full of fashionable despondency or raw information or lowest common denominator slop. And in mainstream publishing, we do see exactly these phenomena. But the human mind and soul can't thrive in such a river of commercial trash. We have to not only swim against that tide, we have to get up on the riverbank, start cleanup efforts, and open nature preserves," close quote. So Katy, in your answer, and you've already alluded to it, but what is the state of fiction in the modern era? And do we need to continuously hearken back to yesteryear to find substantive and meaningful work?
Yeah, I mean, the situation is as I described it. I mean, I think we're having just sort of a low moment in terms of what's being lifted up, what's drawing attention. I'm not saying that there aren't enclaves and circles where, it's still the case that really excellent fiction is being made in both secular and Christian spaces. There are a lot of secular writers that I admire tremendously and follow and read, and love to hear more from. But it seems just like those things of quality are being drowned out by just the noise and the mess and the sort of triviality, right? Sort of shallowness. Thoreau would be thrashing in his grave, right? The things that we treat as though they were important, and when they're not. So, we do have a tremendous opportunity in our time. I think there's going to be, there already is, and I think increasingly, the technological changes that are on our horizon. The hunger for depth and substance and reality is going to be more sharpened and more urgent than ever. So Luminor is being founded really to respond to that hunger. And to do exactly what I said, to try to discover and bring to a wider audience both those works of hope that are being produced now, and again, without sacrificing anything in terms of literary quality and without forcing anything in terms of message into the work, without using it in sort of an instrumentalizing or utilitarian sense to get across messages, which has been a bugbear of Christian publishing ever since there was such a thing. But to see reality with clarity, to be, as O'Connor would have called us, prophets of distances, and to take people into the heart of those things that don't change no matter what else changes. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, very, very well. Very well. And I want to ask you two questions that are kind of posing as opposite faces of the same coin. Mm-hmm. Why is literature, specifically the moral imagination, so important to Catholicism? Mm-hmm. And what does a Catholic sensibility do for literature? So let's start with, why is literature, the moral imagination, why is that important to Catholicism? Why at Word on Fire do we care about, good literature that's out there? What, and I'm not trying to, well, let me just let you answer that.
Yeah, I'll quote my friend Joshua Aaron, quoting John Henry Newman, saying that the way to learn to swim in troubled waters is not to have never gone into them or near them. Newman thought we should be teaching literature specifically in Catholic schools, and in part as a way of amplifying and supplementing experience for precisely young, sheltered, good, holy Catholic boys and girls, young men and women, so that when they come into the world where things are tumultuous and not everybody can be trusted, they don't bring the same framework to that they bring to the really safe environments that they're accustomed to, that they know a little bit ahead of time about what's out there, and yet without not without having to sort of run the moral risks by which sometimes people end up falling into temptation and falling into sin, right? And falling into, not just those things, but, actual material danger and damage that you can read a book and those things are not imminently pressing down on you, right? Mm-hmm. You can see what has happened in other kinds of cases. And I think one of the reasons to opt for fiction in this regard, rather than stick to merely the factual and stick to merely nonfiction, is not just the artful way of presenting it that makes it, as Horace says, at once instruction and delight. That's part of what makes it possible to do this, but also, there's a real temptation, there's a real tendency to kind of dissect real lives and take things apart and take people apart and in ways that can be harmful. Gossip kind of has haunted Christian spaces for centuries. You think of Philip Nery's story of the woman with the chicken feathers, right? That she scattered all over town. Once you've dissected this chicken and you've scattered its feathers all over town, you can't get it back or put it back together again. That harm is done. Fiction allows you to look very deeply into the human heart and into the probabilities of human experience. As Aristotle said, prefer the probable impossible over the possible improbable when you're making a story. To look at these probabilities and to say, here are some tendencies, here are some things we can observe, here are some realities we can accept or assign ourselves the responsibility to bear, and without having to kind of dissect real people in the way that's so tempting. I hope all that makes sense.
It totally does.
I think, a couple other thoughts, but yeah.
No, please go ahead.
I also want to call attention to what it means when we say that a work is moral. It doesn't necessarily mean that everybody in it is behaving morally. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're offering examples. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're offering terrible counterexamples either. Right? We're just trying to show real people in their virtues and their flaws, in their successes and their errors, and oftentimes you're showing, as Francois Mauriac said, who wrestled deeply, by the way, with this question of what role does literature have in a specifically Catholic sensibility and specifically Catholic society. Mauriac wanted to say that literature, what it can do is light up the secret sources of sanctity in those souls that seem to us to have failed, and show us the deep roots and seeds of potential sin in souls that seem to us to have succeeded. I'm not saying the second part exactly the way that he does, but it highlights, as Solzhenitsyn said, this way in which the line between good and evil runs through every heart, right? And it's not as if it runs straight. It's not as if it's always just, clearly all the good stuff's over here and all the bad stuff's over there. We have mixed motives. We have complicated pasts and experiences and weaknesses and wounds, and we can be doing the most good at the time when we're also, messing up the most. And, it's in part is because God is working in and through us, and often, sometimes at least, despite our pulling in the other direction. Literature can show you all of that, and at the same time, sort of respect the dignity of individuals and the individuality of cases.
Yeah, very, very good. So, Katy, what goes into writing compelling modern fiction, in your opinion, and who are some of those modern writers that you personally admire?
Let's see, compelling modern fiction. I mean, I think for me as a reader, I have always been looking for that sense of reality, that sense of recognition that, yes, as Virginia Woolf says, this is the way things really are. You've convinced me, even though I've never experienced this. I think Woolf gets maybe short shrift amongst maybe Catholic and Christian readers. O'Connor read her and admired her. She's sort of a chronicler of the contemporary, the turn toward what we think of as modernity, sort of post during and post the World War I era, that Edwardian, covering that time period. Let's see. How far forward we want to go. I loved Don DeLillo's Underworld and was annoyed by White Noise, but still loved it in many ways. I think he's underappreciated as a Catholic writer. I guess, but you asked me about secular writers. He's funny because he's kind of a corner case. He's both at once. And I think you do come across some Catholic writers, especially in what I keep calling the lost generation, the time period in which Dana Joy is writing The Catholic Writer Today and thinking about where are all the Catholics, right? It's not that there weren't any, it's that they're kind of a lost generation. They're so under the radar that it's hard to... it can be hard to pick many of them out or to realize that they are. Jeffrey Eugenides is an example here, really just a craftsman in every way. But you wouldn't necessarily read his novels and know that he had a Catholic background or anything like that. Let's see. I was running down autofiction a minute ago, so I'm going to do a reverse and say I actually love the work of Rachel Cusk. I think she's doing some of the most interesting explorations of identity and the feel of contemporary life and the thoughts that people are thinking and the dynamics that have not changed, even though people say that everything has changed. She's fascinating to me in that regard. And I think her strongest novels, though, are the ones that, the Outline trilogy is tremendous, but Second Place also deserves special mention in my book. Let's see, who else? Gosh, now that I've said this, I'm going to struggle to come up with examples right here on air. Because I'm often telling people about the under-recognized Catholics they should be reading. Like that's the stock answer I have ready. Read Phil Cly, read Kirsten Valdez Quaid, read Alice McDermott, and let's see. Who was it who wrote the novella that was made into The Quiet Girl, Foster? I think that's Claire Keegan. She's tremendous. It's just at the line level, the music of her prose. And Colm Tobin's not bad. I feel like he gets underappreciated. It's maybe hit and miss, but and he's writing more about the previous era, doing a little bit more historical fiction, actually. But as Randy Boyagoda says, when you write about a past moment, you're also implicitly writing about your own present moment, and there's just that lovely texture of realism in a lot of what Tobin does. That's probably enough to be going on with.
This is great. No, it's a great list. It truly is. I want to ask you, Katy, as you look at Luminor launching, what are you looking for in writers who will publish with you? So there's somebody sitting out there listening to this podcast, and they're dead set on writing a work of fiction, and they want to submit it to you. I know that there's a vast landscape, and that which surprises can oftentimes be that which we would want to publish. What are you particularly, with your sensibility, what are you looking for in that writer?
As an editor, I want to see that a writer has a good control, first of all, of tone in a sentence. If a writer can't control tone in a sentence or isn't aware of the valences of what's being said, isn't evidently aware, then there's not a lot else I can do to kind of develop a manuscript at that point. That's something that I think just has to be mastered before people need to be thinking about sending their work out. I am really looking for, I don't want to say that there's any one particular setting or type of story. I'm not necessarily always looking for literary realism over fantasy. I think fantasy and sci-fi and all other kinds of speculative fiction can be extraordinarily well done. If you're looking for examples of that kind of thing, and in our moment, Emily St. John Mandel, Ted Chiang, these folks are doing incredible speculative fiction right now, in part because of their powers of world building. I want to say that it's that immersive sense of reality, that sense that the writer knows what they're doing and is trustworthy for me to come along for the ride that they want to take me on.
Oh, I like that. That's really good. Do you think your audience, will it be somebody who's just walking through Barnes and Noble and then they kind of, they find on the shelf, they may have no religious background, they're just looking for a good story. Is that kind of who you're targeting, or are you targeting the evangelizing Catholic audience that wants to have the narratives and the tools in their shed to be able to speak to a secular audience by understanding what Luminor produces and so on? Who do you hope will read these
We're
books?
really walking a tightrope here, and we're really looking at serious readers of any faith or none. So that could be the Catholic who gets all of the subtext and all of the little asides and special things that a Catholic writer might be hiding in there as seeds of the word, maybe even unconsciously, maybe without recognizing that they're doing it. The writer, I mean, not the reader. The writer might not have recognized, I was being very Catholic here, but the reader, the Catholic reader might be the one who can pick that up. But we're not only writing for that Catholic reader or editing or publishing for that Catholic reader. We're also seeking to engage anyone who likes a good story and who wants to immerse themselves in that sense of reality that's inside somebody else's mind and receive that communication that person has there, that writer could give, in not quite the same way as any other writer possibly could. So yeah, both and, as we like to say.
When, Katy, can we expect to see the first releases from Luminor?
So I'm very excited. We are not yet publicly releasing titles and covers. That's coming very soon. I'm excited. We have our first books scheduled for early in 2026. And we have a calendar of releases slotted all throughout 2026. We're also getting ready to firm things up for 2027, and I'll be acquiring for 2028 season pretty soon. So yeah, we've got some exciting stuff in the works to deepen and continue the conversation, but that's all I can say about that at this point.
Fantastic. Katy, you've been very generous with your time. And so let me close with one last question. And that is how has writing changed you? And specifically, how has it deepened your Catholic faith?
I think it's forced me to look at things as they are and not as I would have them be. And that is I think, something that often plays into loss of faith or deconstruction is this sense that I thought things were one way and it turns out they're this other way. And I feel betrayed because I feel that I couldn't trust the people who were telling me things are this way and you need to believe what I'm saying. That crisis of trust is something that we have to think about very seriously as Catholics. We have to think about whether the world we're describing is a world that other people experience or it can understand or can believe in. If we don't, even Christ said, if you don't believe me about earthly things, how can you believe me when I tell you about heavenly things? And in part, that's a two-way street. But the part that we can play is making sure that our sense of reality is well calibrated and that we're responding to experiences as they are really felt and received by individuals and in the world. And that starts, I think, with what the saints are always calling us to, which is honesty, self-awareness, a kind of candor, a kind of integrity that's necessary to try to cultivate. And then craft and everything else comes after that.
Katy Carl, author, editor of Luminor, and champion of the Catholic literary renaissance. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you, Todd. It's been a joy.
So I've been thinking, when it comes to reading short stories, I can't help but thinking of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Let me explain. As you know, Goldilocks stumbles her way upon the home of the three bears, where she tries the chairs, eats the porridge, lays in the beds of Papa Bear, Mama Bear, and Baby Bear. Papa Bear's possessions always seem on one extreme, while Mama Bear's land on the other. Baby Bear's, however, consistently prove to be just right. Short stories, likewise, run the risk of falling into extremes. In one form, they are too harsh, with unlikable characters, unnecessary vulgarities, and unrelatable circumstances. A reader loses hope in a sea of cynicism. This is the trouble with much modern fiction. On the other hand, some short stories prove to be too domesticated and blandly predictable. They are at once saccharine in plot and depthless in character. Consumers of these stories find themselves awash in soul-numbing kitsch. The stories are sweet, but they're also soulless. But Katy Carl finds another way. Katy's stories are complicated. Her characters are broken, but not beyond redemption. Her narratives are earthy with room for heaven's light. Just when you peer into the abyss, you feel a force drawing you back. Likewise, when you begin to feel content, the ground trembles beneath your feet. In their respective fiction, Flannery O'Connor jars, Walker Percy coaxes, and Evelyn Waugh pokes. Katy's style draws a little from each, while having a Catholic and poetic sensibility all her own. A good story is complicated because we are complicated. But that is not enough. We need a hint, a hope, a glimmer that tells us that there's a way out of our current morass, the promise of a path that leads to sunnier uplands. G.K. Chesterton captured this in an essay from his 1909 collection, Tremendous Trifles. Quote, "Fairy tales do not give the child his first idea of bogey. What fairy tales give the child is his first clear idea of the possible defeat of bogey. The baby has known the dragon intimately ever since he had an imagination. What the fairy tale provides for him is a St. George to kill the dragon. Exactly what the fairy tale does is this. It accustoms him for a series of clear pictures to the idea that these limitless terrors had a limit, that these shapeless enemies have enemies in the nights of God, that there is something in the universe more mystical than darkness and stronger than strong fear." Close quote. Katy Carl's work is complicated, so enjoy it in all of its grit and glory. After all, she's writing about you and me and all of our darkness and light, and trying to show us the path forward. And one last thing, read Katy Carl's Fragile Objects for a just right exploration of the hopes and limits of the human condition. And also, for a take on the writing craft from a modern master, read Flannery O'Connor's essay, Writing Short Stories, in her essay collection, Mystery and Manners. With either read, you won't be disappointed. Thank you once again for joining me on the Evangelization Culture Podcast. I'm Todd Warner, and until we meet again, keep bringing Christ to a hungry culture.